Yeah, thanks. So I work for GitHub. I'm ostensibly in Brisbane, but I'm rarely anywhere except my room or on a plane or somewhere else. Right now, I thought I'd start with a nice diagram. We're going to talk about the inner loop and dev tools, and this is going to be super loose because this is a combination. This is my diagram of where I am at the moment. I'm in the middle of this tired and busy, and then probably a third thing because you're supposed to have three. That's Damo not at his best, and that's where I am right now. So my first meeting was at 5 o'clock this morning. My last one last night finished at 11 o'clock, and that's been pretty common for the last little while. And I have a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. So I don't know what sleep is anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through a bunch of GitHub stuff, but I'm going to run through some of the ideas behind the tooling that we have and like why we've been doing that work and why the products are evolving the way they are. Where I can, I'm going to call out other alternative products too, because it's not, I don't want this to be like a GitHub sales thing. I'm generally not great at sales. So if there's alternative tools, especially in the .NET space, I will definitely mention them as well. Speaking of, there are some JetBrains licenses I think that I can give away. I am going to take the advice and just give them away for good questions, but there's 4 of them here. Please only take them if you're going to actually redeem the license, because apparently we get in trouble if we give them away and people don't redeem them. So yeah. Some of the things I'm going to show you, well, none of the things I'm going to show you use any JetBrains stuff, but JetBrains does have extensions that use GitHub Copilot, which is going to be part of this, part of the demos as well. So I'm going to go through a few slides. I'm going to talk about the ideas behind developer productivity and this inner loop of the stuff that you do day to day. But at any point, if you have questions or if there's demos that I'm going to do and you want to see something that I'm not showing you or you have a question about it, just yell out. Interrupt Damian in the front because he'll be talking. He'll be asking a question already. So the first thing, so most people here are developers, right? Yep, most hands, a few nods. So depending on who I give this talk to, like if you ask the developers what makes their job hard, there's a huge range of answers. But a lot of it comes down to this idea of like unnecessary friction. Things that you're forced to do or that you have to do as part of your job that take you out of that flow of actually, getting code on paper, for want of a better word. Hopefully not on paper. But getting code out that solves the problem that you want to solve, right? And there's necessary tasks, like you do need to manage your work, you do need to track the work that you're doing, you do need to run tests, you do need to do code reviews, there's all of this other stuff. But when you're writing the code, you kind of want to be focused on that. The friction parts come during that sometimes in some organizations, but they come as you switch between those tasks. So let's say you are doing some work and you get an urgent request from somebody to do a code review. Now, how much friction is that? If that's swiping to another screen and opening a code review and being able to work really effectively in that and then swiping back, that's a relatively low amount of friction. If you have to undo all your changes, like roll them back, stash them, do whatever you need to do, and then get your system set up so that you can test somebody else's changes halfway through, and then go through those changes and work out what's wrong, leave some comments, and then undo all of that and come and redo all of your stuff and work out where you were. That's a lot more friction. And that stuff ends up one of 2 ways. Either you never get anything done because you're constantly switching tasks, or you put off things like code reviews and managing your tasks because it's annoying and you want to get your stuff done. So either the admin stuff falls to the side and you don't do it well enough, or it gets in the way of the work. So reducing that unnecessary friction is an important part of keeping developers happy and productive. So we talk about developer happiness and developer productivity a lot at GitHub, and the products, they're mainly an attempt to improve that situation in general, like to remove that friction, to keep you in the flow and things like that. One of my favorite kind of researchers around the DevOps space as well is Gene Kim. He's written a bunch of books. The Phoenix Project is kind of the first one that got me into him. The Unicorn Project is is kind of the follow-up to that. I'd highly recommend reading them as well. They're not like textbooks, they're novels, so they're actually readable. They they're like these books about DevOps that I've actually read, as opposed to all the ones that I say I've read that sit in the bookshelf behind me. They're actually really good. They introduce really good ideas, but they do it in the form of a kind of a story. The Phoenix project introduced the 3 ways of DevOps, so 3 ways of thinking about DevOps and 3 ways that that can apply to your software engineering processes. The Unicorn project introduced these 5 ideals. And so this is like 5 ideals for an organization doing really good DevOps. And one of them, which I love, is called Focus, Flow, and Joy. And the idea is that if you, as an engineer or any professional really, can focus on the work you're doing, get into that flow, it gives you a sense of, well, he uses joy, but it gives you a sense of a kind of progress and accomplishment. If you have to break out of that focus and that flow, then you lose that kind of sense of accomplishment. You are constantly frustrated by the fact that now you have to go and ask the database team to like make a change for you so that you can test the thing that you just did, or provision a new machine so you can run through your tests. Or, you know, the first job I ever did outside uni was for a government department, and we had 3 logins for our Windows machines. There was the admin one that could do stuff on the computer. There was the dev one that could do some stuff, and then there was one that had access to the internet. And you couldn't use all 3 at the same time. You had to log out and log back in to go to Stack Overflow, which I don't know if it existed back then, dating myself, but anyway. So that is a massive point of friction. You can't get your work done. So there's not a lot of joy in that organization, or there wasn't at that time. I'm sure it's a joyful, wonderful place now. Just in case anybody knows. So if you're constantly happier as a developer, you're not constantly fighting against the system, these sources of friction, then it turns out that you are more productive. And there's a lot of research, again, Jean Kim, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, I'll mention one of her books later on, and Jez Humble, I think, is the other one who does a lot of that work. There's genuine correlation between happiness of developers and not just how productive they are and how much code they get out the door, but even company success based on their own metrics. So if your engineers are happier, your company makes more money, if that's what your company is doing. Or, you know, according to their own success metrics, they do better. So putting that in like real terms, can anybody guess, like if you have 100 developers in your company and you can save each dev like 5 minutes every hour, just 5 minutes that they used to spend on some piece of friction that they don't. Can anybody work that out of how much money that is? This is a good way to sell this stuff to managers, by the way, because they care about the dollars. Any guesses?
What's the rate?
This is average salary of developers in Australia, which is wrong, probably. Yeah, but it's approximate. All right, nobody's answering. So I'm just going to say it's about $1 million a year. If you have 100 devs, they save 5 minutes an hour. And 5 minutes an hour is not actually a lot. Like, there's things that I've started using that save me well and truly 5 minutes an hour. There's tools that I've used that add 10 minutes for every hour, right? So this amount of money is not an unreasonable amount of money. And that's, of course, not talking about the very real benefits of having happier people in your organization. Happier people write better code. This is one of the books that I was mentioning, Accelerate. This is Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, Jean Kim. They've got work in here, research in here that shows that if you apply the right practices, company success and employee happiness are positively correlated. So you do better. So it's in everybody's benefit to make lives a bit easier. Now, that's kind of a guiding principle for stuff that we do at GitHub, but it's a guiding principle for stuff that happens in a ton of different organizations. And as cynical, I'm not going to look directly at you, Damian, but as cynical as you can be about AI tooling, that's ideally the aim of those tools, is to save you time and kind of get you to where you want to go faster, right? Scott Hanselman's got a great quote, like you've only got so many keystrokes in your lifetime, so you may as well like make the most of them. And hitting tab a few times to do the autocomplete stuff is a great use of keystrokes. But it's not just the AI tooling. There's another couple of things, and if you're writing Windows software or stuff that needs an editor or an environment that's not just a web thing, then the equivalent for Microsoft is DevBox, but we have one called Code Spaces. And we use this internally. So we have about 3,000 engineers inside GitHub, I think, across the world. Like the GitHub itself, we call it GitHub because the URL is github.com/github/github. It is a Ruby monolith. It's huge. Yeah, sorry, we have 1,500 engineers, sorry, about 3,000 staff. By the way, if you did that math before about how much that would save you, if you save them all 5 minutes, that's about $15 million a year. And that's based on Australian salaries. US salaries are different. This is the same code base we've been working on since 2008. It's mainly Ruby. There's about 60 services. There's a lot of React in there now and a bunch of other stuff as well. And since we started doing that, the number of people using GitHub has climbed pretty dramatically. There's more than 100 million accounts on GitHub right now. Microsoft acquisition was about mid-2018. And then since then, just to let you know how much we use our own software, we're kind of one of the places that uses their own stuff more than anybody else. Right? All of our engineers use it, a huge amount. So we're our own customer. We're also not our own customer, which is a tricky thing because other companies work differently, and you need to make sure that you don't have blinkers on about the way that you work. You need to do customer research. I'm digressing. Anyway, so just to let you know how much we use it internally, we've done about 80,000 deployments in the last year. We have done about 1.9 million commits in the internal repos in the last year. And the way it works is we hit our APIs to get information out, and we've done like 4.3 billion of these per day. So that's a pretty decent metric. So with these massive numbers, like with the amount that we use the thing, the more we can save developers' time or the engineers' time, the more that improves their lives and the more that improves the product ideally. So the one thing that we've kind of landed on is to improve that product, or that productivity is, sorry, to improve productivity, you focus on the developer experience, like what happens day to day. Some of the things we've done internally, we have this concept called Dev Day Zero, where day one, well, everything you need to be able to write code that makes it into production happens before you even get there. Like you don't need a day one to get stuff running. So code running in production basically as soon as you get there is entirely possible, and I'll show you in a sec. I just got permission to show you this, so that's good. One of the ways we do that is no code running on your local machine, which sounds mildly insane, but when an engineer joins GitHub, they get given a laptop, and then none of the code for GitHub will ever really land on that laptop. People don't clone the repo locally. They use a code space. So it's basically a machine that runs in the cloud. It's already set up and already optimized for that code base. And you spin it up and it runs and all of the code is there. It's already got all of the environment settings. It's got the dependencies. It's got everything you need. And this has a couple of advantages. One is that the onboarding time for a new engineer is massively reduced. We went from about 45 minutes to like get something running on your machine at a best case to less than a minute. Yeah, question.
The 45 minutes was still fully automated though. If I remember the GitHub post from like 5 years ago where you get your laptop and you run like a single command and it sets up your whole machine, but that's the execution time, I guess.
Yeah.
Set up your machine, right?
Yeah, so for the stream as well, that 45 minutes was still an automated process. It was a run a thing and it'll pull down the code and install your dependencies and do all that kind of stuff on a brand new, like fresh laptop. So that went from 45 minutes to a minute. If you go back further in time, that's a day or more, right, of getting stuff set up. That same, sorry, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't follow that. Is it talking about like how long it does take to build a development environment?
Pretty much, yeah. How long does it take to build a development environment? So basically, how long until you can start writing code that you can commit that will make it into production and debug? Yeah. You know, why don't we? Yeah. That first, Yeah, that first government department that I worked in, I think it was about 3 weeks because I didn't have a machine for the first week. Yeah. Oh, you know what?
Visual Studio on it for a week.
Couldn't, no, because I was on the wrong account.
SQL Server used to take 4 hours to install by itself.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, how about I show you? Here's risky demo number 1. This is GitHub, right? So this is the actual code base. You can see there's 900 pull requests that are open at the moment, 578 issues. Don't look too closely at the comments. So let's, like, you can clone it. You can do that locally. But I'm going to create a new code space. So there's one that's already running just in case this doesn't work beautifully. But I'm going to start a brand new one while we're watching. We use a couple of features of CodeSpace that we did internally first and then turned them into products and made them more available. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see. There you go. There's all the code. The service setup, we've got a command line. Like, we can start writing code right now. And just for reference, where's the terminal again? Yes, it's going to give me a whole bunch of warnings and things like that because I don't have extensions installed and things like that. But I can write code and I can debug, and I will show you that. Does anybody know the Linux command to find a size of a folder? It's like lsdu or something. You know what? I'm going to What's that? Yeah, I was just about to do that actually. Copilot. Suggest, hang on, let me just do this so you can see it. Suggest, find out the size of the current folder in. I don't know how to do anything without an AI now. Yeah. It's disturbing. There you go. Yeah, it's generic shell, that's great. dush dot, yeah, okay, I'll copy it to the clipboard. Exit. All right. Yes, yes, yes. I'm allowed to paste. This is by the way, this is a brand new machine that's living in the cloud. This didn't exist before. They kind of get spun up in preparation, and we do this thing called pre-builds. But that's 34 gig on disk, and you saw how quickly that actually got spun up. So pre-builds means that we have these images that live there, and when somebody spins up a new code space, it just grabs that image. It has the stuff installed. It has all the dependencies ready to go. This actually does take a second, but I am going to do, sure, whatever that one is. So this is Visual Studio Code running in the browser. And I am going to just switch back to that because it does have to run a couple of things and give some error messages and warnings and stuff that I probably shouldn't show you. But while that's spinning up, I'll give it like a minute and I'll come back. The point is, and this did this last time I did this presentation. It genuinely crashed at this point. Yes, question while I kill PowerPoint.
How much ID capability is that for workspaces? Any idea?
For code spaces? Yeah, so you can, it's based on Visual Studio Code. You can connect to it directly as like over SSH. So you can kind of use whatever you want. However, it's based, like it's designed basically to be using Visual Studio Code, either in the browser like that or
Dev containers, it's also an open standard.
yeah. So dev containers is the definition of what it looks like what the container should look like, which is slightly separate from code spaces. Code space is the environment in the cloud that follows that dev container. You can generally open them with the editor in the web, or you can do, so here we go, or you can do like,
It's a VS Code plugin, right? So you can just run in your own copy.
yeah, so you can like open it in VS Code Desktop, or yeah, so you can do it locally as well. I don't know if there's a way to do it in full VS. I don't think so, not yet. Yeah, there's I think NeoVim people use as well. I don't know what.
IntelliJ is trying, but they're not there yet. Docker just rolled out dev containers
Okay.
inside the GUI.
By the way, there's 34 ports running in this thing. Let's see if I've chosen the right port. When you create a code space, by the way, it gives it just a random name. This one's Shiny Broccoli. I've submitted a pull request to add a bunch of things to that, and they didn't get merged. Like just the adjectives and stuff. All right. Yeah, so yeah, it is based on that. If you do have like Windows Dev, because these are all Linux under the covers running like Docker, basically. If you do need like Windows Dev, DevBox is the version of that, I think at the moment. And that's the same concept. You define what the Windows machine looks like, and it will, yeah, define what the Windows machine looks like, and it will build one for you on the fly. So yeah, there you go. That's the GitHub website running in a machine in the cloud that you just saw me start up from scratch. I could make changes to that code and it will change, you know, what I'm running. And I'm debugging, basically. I don't have any of this code on my local machine. There's 34 gig of it living there somewhere. But that means that, you know, in that space of time, a new dev with a brand new machine can get up and running. Yeah.
Damian, does the, you search GitHub, what data is set up in these instances then before?
That's a great question. I don't know, is the short answer.
Because you did some.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. What data is set up? If I did search GitHub, what data is kind of set up locally? I would imagine there's some. I don't know.
You just have Docker images that can have pre-compiled stuff in them.
Yeah.
It's depending on how much you're maintaining it.
Couldn't find any. Yeah, there you go. So there's errors and stuff like that. There's probably other steps that you can run to say, hey, I want to do this kind of work. I haven't done anything with that beyond show that front page. So the demos are great when you change the title and then just gloss over the rest. But yeah, I mean, you saw in here when I did that debug, like there's a bunch of other things, other like tasks that I can use. My guess is that, you know, there's a lot of running tests. There's running Ruby scripts. There's probably a bunch of Ruby scripts that will do that kind of data as well. It's worth noting that that website is just one of these. There's 34 like services that are running as I'm running these things, and it's connecting to those as well. If I wanted to make this available to somebody else as well, I can change that port visibility to be private to the org or public as well. So if I'm working, I can just say, hey, can you visit this URL and show me what you, and tell me what you think. So that's pretty handy for showing people the work that you're doing too. Anyway, the point of this that I was getting at is that, you know, I have a running debuggable application, you know, inside the time it took me to show you that. All right, let's see if this works. Cool. So that is, you'd think I know how to use this stuff a bit faster. There you go. That's code spaces. You can build much bigger machines. The other side of this as well is that this kind of gives you ultimately, like essentially unlimited compute, because you can just spin up a brand new code space, do some work, and tear it down. That code space, by the way, was spun up in the main branch. Actually, it's still called master in GitHub, but it's spun up in that main branch. And then if you wanted to spin up a different one in a different branch, you can just switch to that branch and spin up a new code space, and it's in that context. In fact, if you go to a pull request in GitHub and spin up a code space from there, that you'll be in the context of that pull request, so you'll be able to see everything that's there. This makes code reviews a lot faster because you don't have to worry about your local machine. You're just spinning up a brand new one in the cloud, doing whatever you need to do, and then just tearing it down. So that switching cost of being able to like pull something up and do some other work and then come back again, it massively reduces that switching cost. It also means that you can switch devs between projects pretty easily, because I don't need to worry about what version of .NET or Ruby or Java or anything that I have on my machine, because it's not on my machine. To put this in context, so I don't really write code in Anger anymore. I only write demo code, which is great because all it needs to do is look good. And even then, you can do some edits in Premiere. But yeah, so just to put it in context, I had to get a new laptop at one point because there was a version of the Macs where if you plugged in HDMI and it went through a device called a decimator, which conference venues use a lot, it would use HDCP copy protection stuff, and it would just not work. So even though it's my job, I was turning up at conferences and putting my laptop down and then plugging it in, and it would not project. So I was having to borrow laptops at the last minute. They replaced my laptop essentially. It was about 3 months before I realized I didn't have Visual Studio on my machine locally, because I just hadn't been using it. I'd been using a code space every time. So I needed to use Visual Studio Code, VS Code, and so I installed it. And then I went to clone a repo, and I realized I didn't have Git installed on my laptop, which is not I mean, I work for GitHub, and I had a 3-month-old laptop without Git on it. But that kind of shows you, I guess, how much you don't need to rely on the local machine anymore. Yeah. Anyway, so yes, it's beyond just that onboarding. There's as much compute power as you want, as long as you're prepared to pay for it or spin them up and tear them down. The security is improved as well, because none of the code is on this laptop. So as soon as I close that browser or log out of GitHub on that browser, if somebody steals my laptop, there's nothing on there that they can get. On the flip side as well, if I have a dependency that has a security vulnerability that works out how to read my email or something like that, that's in a machine up in the cloud somewhere. It's not going to be able to read anything on my local device. So the security is improved with that, and then the context switching massively improves as well. It reduces that
I'm just
risk.
thinking you're probably on like hosted exchange, right?
Hosted exchange? Yeah. GitHub uses Google Apps.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
You don't have that security.
We don't have the whatever that one was. We don't have the security. We don't have any security flaws. So yeah. Until you press stuff.
Compress stuff.
Oh yeah, until you compress stuff.
Yeah.
I think we'll take this off the line. So that's one side of it, right? The switching costs, the machine that you're doing the work on. That's one of the areas. The other one is, as much as you've probably heard nothing but this, is GitHub Copilot. So does anybody here use GitHub Copilot at the moment? And I say specifically GitHub Copilot because what happened is that it was very successful, and then Microsoft decided all of their AI tools were going to be called Copilots. So we can't say Copilot anymore. It's GitHub Copilot. Some of the Copilots are actually really good. The one for Teams is actually amazing, because if you miss a meeting, it's really good at summarizing what happened in that meeting. So you don't need to turn up to any meetings. Or even chats and stuff like that. You can get it to summarize the main points of the chats. Those ones are excellent. There's other ones that I haven't used that I have heard mixed reviews about, but ultimately, like, the word Copilot just means AI assistant. Not even just within Microsoft. I think Adobe's got one that's called Copilot as well. So I don't think we could trademark that, so that's what happened. So it's basically a tool that helps you convert comments to code and to reduce boilerplate, basically reduce the number of keystrokes you need to use. But it's pitched very much as an AI pair programmer. Now I had to build a demo using 3D modeling stuff using Three.js, which I'd never really used before. And I was going through this cycle of using Copilot. So there's chat, and then there's the original Copilot. And I kind of found myself working together with it. Yeah.
Is it also supported in Japanese too, or it's all like you said, if you write a comment, they will
yeah.
use the code?
Well, I can show you. How about we jump straight to a demo then? Because yes is the short answer. Let me show you. Well, I can show you that one first. Here. Is this big enough for everyone?
Yeah, that's good.
Good. Okay. Let's jump to this one. So this is an errors file that I've got, which is just it's giving a bunch of fairly general error messages in English and in Spanish. You speak Japanese?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I was to say language, it's already suggested French, but
Control across or whatnot to partially input right now.
I usually just keep typing. I don't know how well that translated. You would obviously want to get somebody who is a native speaker to make sure that these error messages are correct, but that's probably got some of the way there.
I can't read it. Oh yeah.
So
Yeah, it's pretty natural, really.
it's all right. Yeah. The other thing you can do as well is ask questions of Copilot chat in whatever language you want, or leave comments in whatever language you want, and it will fill that out. The reason it's doing this is because, or the reason it can do this is because it's basically using the same underlying models as ChatGPT. So these are using GPT models. The original GitHub Copilot used one called Codex, which was a descendant of GPT-3, which was trained specifically to work on code. Like it had been trained on billions of lines of publicly accessible code and natural language, and so it was really good at, it was tuned for code. Then they looked at using GPT 3.5 Turbo, and it turns out that it performed just as well when it wasn't specifically trained on code. There are some things that they do with the prompts and so on to make sure that it's specific to code, or it gives better results with code, but it was ultimately the same models. So when you talk to it, it's basically like talking to ChatGPT. Now, depending on what part of Copilot you're using, or what implementation, whether it's chat or the inline stuff or some of the newer stuff that's coming out, it might use GPT 3.5, or it might be using GPT 4, or it might be using some other stuff that we've got as well. So that's one example. The other thing that we've added recently as well is this workspace option. So this is GitHub Copilot Chat. So you can do stuff inline. Oh yeah, sorry, question.
So I was like, sometimes I've used it and I get pretty much the end of the line and it will suggest a semicolon at the end. How expensive is it to get up running this as a service where, okay, I pay some fees,
Yeah.
but if I just go ham on it and just get all the semicolon suggestions,
Yeah, so the question...
server back there and GitHub is struggling to rule out?
hopefully not struggling. So the question was about sometimes you get to the end of the line and the suggestion is a semicolon, right? And how expensive is that semicolon to get to you? The cost to you is the same, whether you use it or not, basically. The cost to us, there's a lot of optimization that happens. So we're not, the way it works, I'll try and explain it, is in the editor, so that's VS Code or NeoVim or any of the JetBrains suite as well, there's an extension there, or Visual Studio, full version. There's an extension in there that uses basically a local, really lightweight model to decide what context to add to send back up to GitHub Copilot. And so here, if I started typing some stuff here, it would probably use most of this file because it can fit that in the context. It would see that I've got another file open as well, and it would start to pull information from that. There's a team at GitHub of I think at least a dozen people who just constantly run experiments on how to improve that prompt. So get better and better results from that prompt. So it builds that prompt, it sends it up to the Copilot servers, and then we run through a bunch of filters, and they're things like looking for cached responses. So we do a lot of caching to get a response back. The target, I think, is half a second to get actual grey text out, or ghost text we call it. So that's the target. So we do a lot of caching to do that as well. Caching, sorry, I keep forgetting what country I'm in. Caching to get that out. There's also things like language filters. So if you swear at Copilot, it doesn't respond. Just ask me how I know that. And then like whether it's appropriate at that point to give you a response at all. So if you're halfway through a line and it's not going to add much by adding, by giving you a suggestion, it'll just not give you a suggestion. So the semicolon thing is probably, I imagine there's code in there to say, yeah, they probably just want a semicolon at this point. That's probably cached, that response. So it goes through the large language model, it gets responses. We do more filtering to make sure that there's no swearing in that there's no, not that there's no, but we try and remove any security vulnerabilities. So if there's some code that just injects a user input into the a SQL query or something like that, that will get stripped out, so we don't give you that suggestion. And there's a bunch of work going on about that. And again, yeah, a lot of those filters to make that response come back as quickly as possible, and then it comes back. The middle part, that large language model though, runs on GitHub's Azure tenant, so it runs in our servers. It uses the models from OpenAI, but we don't send anything to OpenAI. It's all living inside the GitHub one. The questions we get a lot on that are, can I use my own model for that? And the answer is no. You don't have enough money to run those machines, frankly. There's also that. And the other one is, can we run it locally? And the answer to that is no as well. However, there are extensions for Visual Studio Code, if you have a look, that will let you run large language models for prediction locally. I can't remember what they're called, but there's some that are based on the Llama. I think it's Code Llama is the branch of that focuses on code. So you can run them locally. They're not as accurate, I guess, but they're probably pretty good if you're on a plane or something like that. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that happens. So that cost, it's really hard to tell how much that semicolon cost. But there is obviously a cost to running that stuff on the server. Yeah.
If I'm currently getting some quite unhelpful suggestions because I'm working on something odd, I can just swear into a comment and it will leave me alone.
So that was more a comment than a question. Yeah, which was basically, if it's giving me unhelpful suggestions, can I just swear into a thing for a little bit and it'll stop bothering me? It'll probably not stop bothering you at all, actually. You might get flagged if you do it too much. You'll notice as well, by the way, when I do these demos, this is like, that's the account that I'm logged in as, not Damo Visa. Because there's a bunch of other stuff you can do policy-wise for Copilot. So if you use Copilot for Business, which is where you assign licenses to your organization, basically, we never keep any of the prompt or the response. It never even hits disk, as far as I'm aware. So we build the prompt, we send it up, we run it through the filters, we run it through the large language model, through more filters, it comes back, and then it just gets wiped from memory. Even with the Copilot for Individuals license, there's a checkbox that says, can we use this stuff? And that stuff, for the record, doesn't get used to retrain the model. It gets used to identify how we can build better prompts. So we don't feed your code back into the model to retrain it ever. If you're interested in that, you can have a look at the, there's the policies, I think, or the policy document for GitHub Copilot, which explains exactly what we do and what we don't do. And that makes that very clear. So there was a point to me asking that. Yes, so when I use my GitHub account, we do a bunch of that stuff, or we block a bunch of stuff that is really unhelpful for demos. So one of the other things you can do is say, if this response, if this suggestion matches any publicly available code, so anything that's open source, then don't give that as a suggestion. So sometimes you get responses from Copilot chat or from somewhere else, anywhere else in there to say, this response has been blocked because it doesn't meet that policy. So that's why I have another account that doesn't have that policy turned on. So it'll just give me whatever it's going to give me. Yeah. There is also the ability to define repositories or files that get excluded from Copilot. So if you are using Copilot and you're in a passwords file, for example, you're not going to get Copilot suggestions for that file, and it doesn't get used in contexts. So you can explicitly say, this repository, people are not allowed to use Copilot with that repository for whatever reason. Some of the other things we've done here as well is this workspace. So usually the context that gets sent up is like the file you're looking at, or the lines of code that you have highlighted. But you can say, you know, what's the tech stack for this app? And it will have a look through that whole workspace, like the code that you're looking at the moment in Visual Studio Code, decide what to collect, pull bits of different files out and send that up. So it's picked 7 references here, and we can expand that in a sec, but it's basically said, it's Python, it's using Fast API, it's using Uvicorn, using Docker, JSON, Git, and so on, and pip from requirements. And so the files that it's chosen are, like, the dev containers are pretty good indication. That's the definition of the development environment. The git ignore file is pretty useful for finding out what the tech stack is and so on. And yeah, these are deep links as well, so you can go to those files. And you can ask general questions too, like what is UVcorn? I'll zoom in a bit. You can also, because this is going through a large language model, if you're familiar with some of the other prompt tricks you can use for that, you can actually use them with this. So explain it in 3 sentences like I'm 5. So, which sounds like a joke, but I actually do that a bit because it's very useful. It's like a school bus driver for your whole application. Maybe that's not particularly useful, but I will quite often use it. Like I'll quite often say, can you explain what this does in like 3 sentences or something? Because it's, otherwise it might go on for a bit and that's not really what I want. So this is kind of one of the ways you can use it. The way I find myself using it is generally asking it to do a bunch of stuff. Even like, can you write a Java script to, I don't know, so you can ask it to write a bunch of code and then throw that code into, yeah, there you go, draw box. So that code can be added to a new file or, you know, inserted into the existing file and things like that. Yeah.
Is there a way to, got like specific style requirements in the config file? Is there a way to get it to conform to that?
So the question is, yeah, so the question was if there's certain style requirements for that you need to follow. Is there a way to get it to follow those? Not deterministically. There's ways that you can do it by making sure that there's something, another file open that does follow those standards, because then it will copy. It's really, really good at copying patterns. The best way to get really good code out of Copilot is to already have really good code, because it will copy the way that you've done things. However, if there's like this whole big style sheet of how stuff needs to, or a whole big document about how this stuff behaves, you can't really say refer to that document as a guide explicitly, although you can. Yeah, can you refer to the editor config to specifically say that? That's a great question. Maybe. I've never tried that. But you can specifically include a file as context. So yeah, you might be able to do that actually, because it probably will, whenever I say understand, by the way, please realize that I don't mean understand, I mean token prediction. But if you give it an editor config file and say, this is explicitly some context that I want to give you, this defines what our styles look like, it's likely to read that and try, actually.
Can it do that though? Can it understand and edit the config file and then use that as context to produce a different programming language?
Yeah, can it understand an editor config file? Yeah. Where is the editor config file, by the way? Is it part of the settings? I don't know. I kind of want to try this like on stage now. Yeah. So you can, I mean, you can explicitly, I'm just doing this now, but you can explicitly include a file for context. I don't know where the editor config file would be, but you can explicitly include a file. It's like, honestly, based on other stuff that I've done, I would not be surprised if it did understand what an editor config file was and try to apply those rules. It's scarily good at kind of understanding what those things are. If it's ever seen editor config files before and descriptions about what they do and what they mean, then it's likely to understand, you know, what that actually does. That's a really, I can't do it now, which is slightly annoying me, but I'm going to try that because that's a great suggestion. All right, thanks. You've nerd sniped me. I'm going to do that later.
The solution to that is just to save the document and have it auto-apply the editor config to the generated code, right?
I usually, once it's then, put a block of code in and then run
Yeah, so yeah, you can just let it do its thing and then apply the settings and stuff like that, which is probably safer, I guess. But once you have a number of files open that do follow those standards, it will copy. It'll keep doing
What
that.
do you get if you ask Copilot understands any config files?
Oh. And is it like .editor config? It's also, because I've got this file open, it's also thought, oh, this is probably relevant context, even if it's not. So it knows what it is. Yeah.
Can you ask at workspace, where is my editor config file?
Yeah. Well, it was about to give me an example. Oh, not where the cursor is. Yeah. And this, by the way, at this point, I'm in my head, I'm like, oh, sorry, I wasn't clear, because I want to be really polite. Well, there you go. You can search for it. Yeah.
You just said that sounds like a you problem.
Yeah, basically. Did you just tell me to? Yeah, all right. I could probably drill in and say, actually, there's probably like a VS Code. That's an interesting question. So this is using an extension. There's like an extensibility framework that's kind of getting built out at the moment, where now I'm talking specifically about VS Code. And so this is going to expand in the future where you can do things like talk to Launch Darkly or talk to Datadog or something like that to say, how's this function performing in production? Or is this feature flag turned on? Yeah.
Ask it to create you an edit config.
We're really going down rabbit holes. Yeah, it'll probably just, yeah, here's one. Yeah, so I have no idea whether that's right, but there's a basic one. And it explains what it is and so on. So, I mean, yeah, you can play forever on these, with this, which I have done before. There's a couple of other like little demos I want to show you just because they're fun, and I don't have that one open. So let's see if we can open recent. There we go. Nah, don't save it. Oops, that's cheating. Does anybody know what this is? This file? No? Oh, how do you know that? Oh yeah, sorry, I was asking it some stuff in German. Just to let you know. Yeah, explain how the selected code works. Woo. Using a bunch of references that are weird.
That's supposed to be some kind of artwork or something.
Yeah, it's an implementation of a fractal generator for generating a Mandelbrot set.
Also, the code was formatted as fractal.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is deliberately obfuscated, but what you could do is, sorry, the other way you can do this is inline as well, which on a Mac, on a Mac is Command I, and it's Control I think in Visual Studio Code on Windows. In Visual Studio, the full Visual Studio, I think it's Alt// because I think that looked like A for Alt and then I for AI. I'm just, yep, that's information with no context. Can you make this readable, please? So this is kind of in the context of the editor itself. Like you can get it to edit the stuff that you've selected. You can also make things like, you can also do this and say, can you create some tests for this? And it will generally understand that, well, your tests probably don't belong in this file, they belong in another file. So it tells you, I'm going to create a file and this is what the file looks like. So yeah, this is all like changed code. Yeah, and now I understand it. But that can be useful for things like this is COBOL. I can also say in chat, I could say something like, can you convert this to, I don't know, VB? Sure. Yeah, baby steps. VB.net. Oh, VB.net. Oh, we didn't want .net. Anyway. Yeah, but like, can you explain this code? Can you give me the equivalent of this function in Python or something like that. The AI, yeah, that's right. Well, the trend is for the AI to do the creative stuff, right? Not.
Well, you can ask for brain.
I've done also, yeah, I've done also like ARM templates, converting them to Bicep and things like that, and it does a reasonably good job. There's an obfuscated Java one as well, which is kind of fun. Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff you can do with Copilot Chat, but kind of coming back and forth where it gives you something, you use that, you modify it as you go, you keep typing or ignore what it wants if it's getting it wrong, and then you flip back and forth. Once you start using it a lot, it becomes a kind of a partner, I guess, in some ways, or it's basically a tool that you can go back and forth on, which is kind of cool. There's also the AI stuff has popped up in a bunch of other places as well, so you can use like for committing changes. It's suggested these two based on, or this suggestion based on what the code looks like. Fixing it. Yeah, yeah. Fix, please pass. Swearing, yeah, again, swearing. But the other thing you can do as well is, do I have any pull requests? I do. So by the way, pull requests, I'm just going to delete this to show you. In case you were wondering, here's a little stat for you that about 50% of pull requests have no description, which is great, because like changes and enhancements doesn't tell you anything about what's in this. But you got Copilot in here too, so you can do a summary. And this takes longer than your ghost text thing, because we figure you're happy to wait a little bit longer for a decent description for a pull request than you are if you're mid-type. Yeah, so it'll generate a summary. This tries to as well not just tell you, hey, line 12 changed from this to this. It tells you like these are changes to improve the deployment process, API functionality and testing coverage. Most significant one is the new GitHub Actions workflow for deploying to Azure. So it's not just a really high level kind of, this is what it is. The other thing that it does, which I've never ever seen any developer do, is deep links to the actual change with the description of what each change is. And so it's not going to forget things or miss stuff because it's going through every change that's been made. Yeah, which is kind of cool. So it's popped up there. It's popped up in GitHub Advanced Security, which is like a product which does things like code analysis to see if you've got vulnerabilities in there, secret scanning, dependency scanning as well. So if there's dependencies that you have that have known vulnerabilities, it can tell you about those and even suggest fixes for those as well. The code scanning stuff, which uses CodeQL under the covers, can run and say, hey, this is a vulnerability. It's a cross-site scripting vulnerability. Something that's out really soon, I think, or maybe even available now, is the auto fix thing, where it says this is probably the fix for it. Which don't just blindly merge that. But you can, if you want. If you look at it and you're like, this is great, and will, and just commit those changes, or edit it with a code space. So now you've got the pull request in a code space. You can run it, make sure it actually works, and then commit that change as well. So it's popped up there. We've also got Copilot in the browser now, so in .com. This is part of the Copilot Enterprise SKU, which is more money. So Copilot Individuals is I'm not going to forget the numbers. It's like $100 a year, I think, US dollars a year, I'm pretty sure. Copilot for Business is $19 per user per month. And then Copilot Enterprise will be $39 per user per month. But what Enterprise does is it indexes your code. You can even fine tune the models on your code base, which uses like the LoRa technique to put a layer over the top. So it understands your code base a lot better. But when you do that, you can get it to, this is that travel weather API, which I was kind of playing with but didn't show you. But where in this code are the API routes defined? So this is like in the editor. You don't even have this. Sorry, in the browser. It's not even in the IDE. And there you go. API routes are in that file in main.py. These are the routes. Like there's the root one, deep links to the code itself as well. So it's indexed the code, it knows what everything does, and it's kind of got that. So you can kind of explore the code, have a chat with your code. So are there tests? And it will probably, hopefully, find the test file. This is one of the other ways that you can see whether stuff enforces standards. So yes, there are tests. And then I can also ask, I'll just start typing, there any routes that aren't covered by tests? And so this is pretty useful for finding these gaps, basically. You can explore the code base, work out what it does, and so on. It gets you up to speed a little bit faster. So going back to the original point of this whole thing, reducing friction, you've got much reduced like onboarding time for a new project because you can just spin it up in a code space. You've got reduced time for understanding a project because you can just ask questions of it. So, you know, what's the code base? What does it look like? Are there missing tests? You know, what does this thing do? Yeah. You could even say at this point, can you write some tests for these missing ones, and it will probably give you, it'll give you code that you can use. At that point, you'd probably want to switch to the editor, right? But yeah. So there's a bunch of different places where this is showing up. Yeah.
With the pull request summary, does the owner of the repository have to have a Copilot license for that option to come up?
The licensing is, so the question was, for the pull request summary, does the owner of the repository have to have that license? And I think it's all user-based at the moment. So my account, I'm logged in as my actual account now. My account has a Copilot Enterprise license through GitHub. So I have the indexed stuff, I have the Copilot for pull requests. I could do fine-tuning if I want. I'd probably get in trouble because that takes hours. Yeah, so it's the license of the person, I think. Yeah. Sorry, there was one here.
Yeah, does it need to be GitHub, or you can use other?
Great question. Does it need to be GitHub, or can you use something else? Copilot in the editor doesn't care where the code lives. So in Visual Studio Code or in Visual Studio, if I have a Copilot license and the Copilot extension is installed, it doesn't matter where the code lives. But you're obviously restricted to it only knowing the context of your workspace at that point, like what is happening in that workspace. So the stuff I'm doing now, obviously that's going to need GitHub. We can't index your code if it lives in, even in Azure DevOps, we've said we're not going to do that. If it's in Bitbucket, we can't index that code either. So if you want that side of it, the closer understanding of your code base, then it's got to be in GitHub. But otherwise, you can just buy a Copilot license and use it with like GitLab if you want. It's just that point where you do the customization and the personalization stuff, that's where it stops. Yeah.
Back to the edit config area. And it just says, it explains that file is used to define the styles and for different editors and IDEs. Information there isn't going to be helpful, in my case, for how to connect to the GitHub profile. And it says, but in any case, this is how you do it.
Right. So you tried the editor config stuff and it explained what it was for and then said it wouldn't be.
But it doesn't have any info that will be helpful in building this.
It doesn't have any info that it will be helpful for building. Yeah, okay. So partial success? or mainly failure. Yeah. Yeah, it won't. Yeah, sorry. That's a very good point. It won't apply the styles. You might be able to highlight a bunch of code and say, can you apply the rules in the editor config to this code? And it might be able to write it. I don't know. That'd be another test. Just in case you want to go. Yeah. So yeah, all of the places where we are trying to apply AI kind of are to do with the places where the developer is anyway, and trying to reduce those keystrokes and the boring stuff. Yeah, we're trying pretty hard to make sure we're not just throwing a chatbot at everything. the one metric that we follow really closely, because remember, we don't keep any of your data. The only metric we can really keep is acceptance rate. And so that's something that we look at. So we know how we build the prompt because we know what version of that prompting code we've used. And we know that you gave us a suggestion. Sorry, you gave us some context that we built. We gave you a suggestion. And then we can tell, did you accept that suggestion? And then a few minutes later even, does that code still exist? Or have you just gone and deleted it all? And so that acceptance rate kind of hovers around 23, 24%, I think. And then so that's the acceptance rate, so how much people are actually getting that code and keeping it. But there's also, we keep a metric of how much of the code, how much new code is written by Copilot. So you may reject 3 or 4 suggestions, but then the one that you accept writes 100 lines of code of your 110 line file. So that is, I got the math wrong, but roughly 90%. 89, something? Anyway. So we keep that metric as well. And in some languages, it's up around the 70-something%. So Java tends to be really high because there's probably a lot of boilerplate that it can write for you in Java. Some other languages it doesn't do as well because either it doesn't know the language that well because there's not as much training data, or it's just something that doesn't lend itself to a lot of boilerplate. VB. There's probably a lot of VB in there. Rust, because the only developers who write Rust do everything themselves because they're geniuses or something. Yeah. Do we?
If a new version of C# comes out with new features that it's never seen before, would it still make suggestions on how to use those new features, or does it need existing code?
Yeah, so question was, if there's like a new version of C# that comes out with new features, will it know what those features are, or is it not going to do stuff? So out of the box, when you're just running the code through a large language model, it only has the context that you give it or the context that gets built from the rest of the files. So if you've explicitly asked Copilot Chat, hey, can you give me this code using .NET 7 or something like that, then it's got that context and it's going to do a much better job. If it's really new stuff that just doesn't have much training data, then you're kind of restricted by that training window or the context that you have locally. So if other files are using that functionality, it'll probably copy it. The training window does keep getting updated though. I've tried asking Copilot how up to date it is, and it won't tell me, which is annoying. But I think the last one I looked at was like earlier this year. So they do keep refreshing the models to get more of that data. But there's no implicit use the more modern frameworks first. You can explicitly ask it in your question, or even include something at the top in a comment just saying, hey, we're using .NET 8 or whatever in this. But yeah, nothing out of the box to kind of trend towards newer stuff, I guess. Yeah. Gordon, did you do the?
Yeah, so I asked it to update using my editor config styles. If you just say that, it doesn't work. If you include the file context, or if you have the tab open, then it works.
Huh. All right, so summary was, if you ask it to update the code using the editor config, if you just ask that blindly, it doesn't work. But if you include, if you explicitly include, like supply that as a context, it will do it, apparently. There you go. Thanks for doing that for me so I don't have to later. Yeah, so I want to show you, just out of interest, because I find it fascinating. This is a really hard to read graph. I don't know how much how I can get that much better, but this is a bunch of research we do. So GitHub has a research team especially inside the GitHub Next team, which is kind of like our R&D org. The GitHub Next team were the ones who came up with Copilot to start off with a few years ago, like pre-ChatGPT, and they basically got it to a point where it got handed over to the product team, and then, or we call it EPD team, engineering, product and design team, and got turned into a product. But they do a bunch of research to make sure that we're not just giving people a tool that we say works, but we're giving people a tool that actually does work. So that acceptance rate has gone up really gradually, and the amount of code that is written by Copilot goes up really gradually, and we're making sure that it actually works. This URL will take you to one of the more recent studies that they did. And this was like a fascinating graph that I found out of it, which is the acceptance rate based on day and time. So there's two ways to look at this. You can be really cynical, or you can be positive about it. So I'll tell you both, because I don't know which one's which, and we don't know because we don't have that data. We can't look at the code. So on the weekend, just in case you can't see it properly, on the weekend the acceptance rate's higher than average. It floats up around the 24%. During the work week, during business hours, it's the lowest. After business hours, it's the highest. So the optimistic way of looking at this is that when you're working on the weekend or when you're working at home, you're generally on kind of passion projects. You're trying things, you're trying to learn stuff. And so you're more likely to just accept what Copilot's giving you. Like you're learning a new language, or you're working with an open source project that you like but you're not super familiar with. So your acceptance rate's much higher. You're willing to let the assistant kind of help you along a lot more. During the week though, like you are around that domain, that code base all the time. You know exactly what you want. So you have in your head the code that you want, and Copilot's going to get stuff wrong, obviously. And if that's not exactly what's in your head already, then you're not going to accept that suggestion. So you're much more attuned to this is the correct solution than you are on the weekend and week, like after hours. Now the cynical version, of course, is that if you're working on the weekend or you're working after hours, you're like, I don't care, that's good enough, that's fine. I like that explanation too, but yeah.
It's not a lot of variation though.
No, well that's the other thing. Like the lowest is 21%, the highest is around under 25%. So it's not a huge variation. Like they're still pretty high. If you think about like when you're typing, if you pause for more than half a second, you're likely to get a suggestion. If you keep typing, then that suggestion is a rejected suggestion. So 20% of the time, people are still accepting what Copilot's giving them, which is pretty high in general.
A lot of that time on the weekend and night is going to be playing with Copilot though.
Yeah.
If you could overlay code that made it to production,
yes.
it would be a very different picture.
Yeah. So the comment was that if a lot of that code is like you're playing with Copilot, right? It's not necessarily code that made it to production. Self-fulfilling. Yeah, there's a spike on Thursday night. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to interpret this, but the problem is, like, we don't know what this code looked like because we don't keep that information. So we can only guess, really. Yeah.
That was going to be my exact question is, like, all those theories that you intuited there are similar to what was going through my head, but have you actually gone in and tried to understand, or they just can't because they just don't have the input, they can't?
Yeah, have we gone in and tried to have we gone in and tried to understand? Not really, because the decision was made early on that we are not going to use your code. Like, we're not going to risk that leak of company code, hitting our disk and being used to retrain the models. And that they decided was more important than really learning what exactly is going on. There are things you can do around the edges to increase the acceptance rate without knowing that, and so we're very much there. That said, like, there's more stuff in this article where they do customer surveys. One of the things that they also found is, the acceptance rate is correlated more closely with reported productivity than it is for actual lines of code written. So if people have a higher acceptance rate, they feel more productive. It doesn't necessarily mean they're writing more lines of code. Like, they're not on paper more productive, but they feel more productive, which kind of makes sense if you think about it, because there's an estimate of about like 25% of the time, roughly, as a developer is spent writing code, if that, right? It's not big, yeah. The rest of the time is spent understanding the problem, like working out how you're going to solve the problem, all of that kind of peripheral stuff. And so when you're doing that stuff and you have the solution in your head and you're like, I know how to do this work, then getting it into the editor faster makes you feel more productive because you've done the hard work. Now you just want the code out there as well. So your acceptance rate is higher, you feel more productive. If Copilot is constantly getting it wrong, then you're not feeling as productive because you're having to do it all yourself anyway, which is, yeah. But again, that's my interpretation and my guess of what's really happening because, yeah. Sorry, Gordon.
Do you know if there's anything in the extension that sort of is reactive to if you aren't accepting a lot of things that just makes the timeouts a bit longer? So I'm wondering if the dip is just because of sheer volume. You typing some stuff, something pops up, and then you just carry on typing stuff, so there's lots of rejections. But because the usage is higher during that time, that would negatively affect the stat. Whereas if it was more responsive, it's like, well, you've rejected the last 3, I'm going to wait a second before I start giving you something. Then it's less likely to suggest something that you're just going to continue working with.
That's, yeah, that's, I mean, so the suggestion was there's a correlation between, you know, load, how much people are using it and stuff. I don't know, is the short answer. Maybe, I mean, that's another theory. Well, yeah, I mean, there might be stuff in that report. I haven't read all of it, so. Yeah.
If you're at work and you know exactly what code you're writing and you're just constantly ignoring the prompts,
yeah,
and push down what you're saying,
how?
Push down the
If
acceptance rate, right? Because you're like, no, shut up, I know what code I'm writing here.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, if you're constantly rejecting the prompts, you're just typing because you know what code you want. I don't think there's a like client-side or even server-side setting to say, well, they're rejecting a bunch of suggestions. I'm not going to suggest stuff anymore. I don't know whether. Yeah.
Can you turn off the auto suggestion and have like a keystroke suggestion?
Oh, I mean.
You can just say, don't ever suggest anything to me until I realise that I'm stuck, and then I hit a key combination to get a suggestion.
Yeah, there is. Well, I have heard that before actually. Would it be higher? Yeah, if you have to explicitly ask for a suggestion before it will give you one, would it be higher? I imagine so.
Only ask when you're stuck or you're
yeah.
looking for a shortcut, right?
I mean, the.
You know, like I'm about to write a
Oh, it just changed.
Give me those, you know, of Japanese and 160 other languages. Give me all of that. That's when you know, bang, I want that, and then boom, you get 1,000 lines of text.
Yeah. Great question. I don't think there's a setting to do that. You can just turn it on and off, which you used to be able to do just by hitting that Copilot icon, but now it brings up a menu, which is interesting. I imagine you could probably have a shortcut for that in VS Code. So you basically turn it off, and then when you want a suggestion, turn it back on. But yeah, explicitly asking for one, like the control dot in, in VS Code, I don't think so. You can do Control Enter or Command Enter, and it will give you a bunch of suggestions. So like if I did that, oops, sorry. Oh, am I? Oh, sorry. Sorry, let me do that again. So yeah, you can like, there is the little icon there and you can say, turn it off for a little bit. And I'm sure you could add a shortcut for that. So you could hit a key and it'll turn it off for a while, and then you hit a key and it turns back on. Probably a bit of, you know, it just depends how annoying the ghost text is, I guess. But the other thing you can do, yeah, if you're doing like, oops, that and you hit Control Enter, I think it's Control Enter actually in both editors, it'll give you a bunch of suggestions. So you can explicitly say, can you, and this look, by the way, this looks a lot better since the last time I used it, so clearly they've updated that UI.
So if the ghost text, you look at the ghost text and you're like, that looks like gibberish, you then hit Control Enter, and then you look at the 7 options and hopefully pick one of them.
Yeah, and choose one, yeah.
Rather than just going, ugh, the ghost text is terrible, and trying to muddle your way through.
Yeah, you can also, I think, there, you can also do, like, that's one of one. So it's only given one suggestion here, but it might give a few, and then you can scroll through those. But yeah, Control Enter will do multiple. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any process around that, or you're not training the data off anything?
Yeah, what's the process around essentially making sure the training data contains good code and not terrible code? Great question. I don't know is the short answer. I know that, so they're very conscious that good code is the stuff that's going to increase this acceptance rate, and that's what they are focusing on. So I say that we're using the raw models under the covers, but they are still fine-tuned models. So there's likely to be, I don't know if it's there yet, but I know that the idea of like indexing your own code base so the suggestions look a lot more like your code. I know they're doing work to add context from like known good sources of data. So if you are importing, like here, if you're importing java.util.scanner, if there's documentation around that, it would totally make sense to include that documentation as part of the context on the server side when it's going to give you suggestions. And that is obviously a process that requires somebody to say this is good data and this is not good data. Whether they're retraining the model to strip out the bad examples, I don't know. It's much more likely that they're layering good examples on top, using those same like embeddings techniques and things like that they use for other stuff. It would shock me if they weren't already experimenting with that a lot, because people use the same libraries all the time, right? And if it's going to give you a better response just by looking at what the import statement looks like, yeah. But the short answer is I don't really know. I imagine they're doing that stuff, but I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question because there's terrible code on the internet. Like if you open a brand new file with no context in Copilot and ask it to write something, that's probably the worst result you're going to get out of Copilot. Like it might still be fine, but it doesn't have any context. It doesn't know what you're doing. It doesn't know anything about the project. Like it's blindly just saying, write me some code to do a thing, and that could come from anybody. Whereas, yeah, the more context you can give it, the better the result's going to be. Yeah.
Sorry, I just have a million questions.
That's all right.
Apologies.
That's what I'm here for.
So with the whole context thing, you talked about it keeping in memory and not persisting it to disk and throwing away the context and so on.
Mm-hmm.
If you're, like arbitrary example, if you're writing like the giant jQuery file with 1,000 lines of jQuery and you're at line 990 and it suggests, does it then take that whole file and submit it, or every time? Like is it
Yeah, so yeah, question was basically if you're at 1,000 lines of code and you're at line 990 and it wants to give a suggestion, is it going to send that whole file again? Almost certainly not, but they changed the way they build that prompt so frequently that I couldn't tell you how it works. They run experiments a lot, like with all of this stuff. So they may find that, as an example, they may find that in a JavaScript file that's more than 500 lines long, you get a much better result if you don't send any of that code, you just send the function names and the arguments. That may increase the acceptance rate. And so that experiment will show a difference and it'll make it into production. And then, so they're doing these experiments all the time. A/B testing constantly, yeah. And they also reject experiments that negatively impact performance as well. So there was I can't remember what they did, but there was an experiment that I saw that they rejected which increased the acceptance rate by like a significant amount, like a couple of percentage points a little while ago. But it would take a second to give the answer, and that's too long. If you're typing your code and you have to wait a solid second to get a response, at a minimum, you're going to keep typing. So that got rejected even though it was giving better results, because there's this balance between is it a useful tool or, you know, are you having to pause all the time to get the tool to do the work? Yeah.
And I think people get reliant on it and they'll start kind of instinctively pausing to wait for a suggestion all the time, and then if that when it's dying out, then that actually is productivity, not positive productivity.
They get reliant on it? Yeah, that's me. I pause all the time. And I'll pause and then go, it's a bit too long, and then start typing, and then pause again and be like, okay, thank you. And it's giving me the thing. Yeah.
So you got it running production
I'm not writing real code. Yeah.
You only have so much time to demo, right? And if it pauses too long, it takes up your demo time.
That's right. Yeah. Yep.
So currently it pulls obviously context from your different tabs. Do you know if there's anything coming that would pull from like recently open tabs? Because I have this thing where I have to close tabs because I don't like them open. Then I lose context for Copilot. So I'm like, it's this battle in my mind which is like eating away at my mental health.
Yeah.
Like how much help do I want versus
Yep.
how clean is my IDE?
Yeah.
Does it noticeably slow things down though? Is that what you're saying?
No, like the more tabs you have open, the better context there is.
Yeah,
Because it pulls context from there.
Yeah.
I don't like tabs open.
So yeah, it pulls context from the tabs that are open. But if you go and close all the tabs because you don't like the mess, is there any work to look at previously closed tabs? I don't know. As far as I know right now, it only uses open tabs. But that's not to say we can't. I mean, technically, that extension can do anything that an extension can do. So it could, well, I don't know what the extension permissions are in Visual Studio Code, but like hypothetically, it could scour your hard drive looking for other projects and use code from those projects. I doubt it, but yeah, or not in a dev container, yeah. Yeah, true. So there's a million things that you could do, and it's this balance of what's worthwhile doing and what gives you a benefit and what keeps it performant. And yeah, I think at the moment it looks primarily at other open tabs. Yeah, but that workspace command in chat, by the way, will look at the entire thing. So that's explicitly saying I want to look at other stuff. Yeah.
Would it be nice to switch on the workspace command while you're just doing normal typing?
Yeah, it does slow it down though, because there is that extra time. I will often go into chat so I can use the workspace thing or can explicitly use files, and it will still give you code for the stuff that you're looking at. You just then push it across. But chat uses a different model, I think, than the ghost text one.
In Control I, that's the same as the chat. You can add workspace there.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. Oh, maybe.
Yeah, there's no IntelliSense, but it was working for other commands.
Oh yeah, all right. Yeah, I mean, it still did it, but it's not, yeah, maybe it is just the chat window, actually.
Well, the file scope stuff was working there. There was just no IntelliSense for it when I tried earlier.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, you can always switch to chat. I think it does use the chat, but maybe the drop-down things are not working, yeah. I'm also on an insider build. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm on a production build, so I can't blame that. Yeah.
Can you open something like Fiddler and see what's going back and forth and understand a bit more about how it's working?
Probably. Can you open Fiddler and see what's going back and forth and do it? Probably. I know that, so Westpac Bank did a trial of Copilot where they let a bunch of people use Copilot for a while, and then the trial ended and they were like, let's evaluate the results and see things. One of the technical leads said publicly actually that they turned it off and then they looked at the traffic and people were still using it. They just went and bought their own licenses and they kept using Copilot. So they could see the traffic. He didn't seem angry at it at that situation. I don't think anybody got fired, but they were obviously doing that. They were looking at that traffic. Whether you can see anything useful though, or whether you can just see that there's encrypted messages going back and forth.
Okay, so if you've got 50 tabs open and you see, all right, that took this long and you got this result, and then close some tabs.
With you could, yeah.
Recently open tabs feature comes in and it's opening issues in my recently tabs.
Yeah, you
looked at the GitHub chat Copilot output.
Oh, yeah, you can actually.
Very chatty.
Yeah, so it's not, that's output, isn't it? Output, and then you can say GitHub Copilot. Yeah, so you can see, hang on, let me just get rid of this. Yeah, 9 solutions returned. Yeah, it's even like got some of the context in there as well, like class obfuscated. So you can see kind of what it's sending. I forgot about that, thank you.
So does it always return multiple solutions, even when you don't ask it to? Is that what that's
I don't know. Either that or it's saying it's...
Yeah, it does, because you hover over and you can say next, right?
on every activation?
Yeah, But it seems to say like solution 3 was returned, like it thinks that's the most likely solution. Or, because I would imagine that would say 3 solutions returned otherwise. But that's a great question. I don't know.
Oh, sorry, solution 3 returned.
Yeah, so it's given a
Solutions returned.
given a bunch and said this one's the best one, maybe. I don't know. Could be bad logging. Totally could be bad logging.
Yeah, well, you've got completions and then solutions.
Yeah, fetch
Yeah,
completions.
I had to debug this because it's funny that Westpac went to their personal licenses because I had one personally on corporate at the moment.
Yep.
It was all blocked on the VPN. I couldn't get through the certificate for signing stuff.
Yes. Yeah. So they blocked it on the VPN for your individual one. Yeah.
And then you got the enterprise license, which was really good because they switch your personal one straight over and refund your personal license.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. I'm like,
Yeah. So if you get a business license, if your company pays for it, that takes precedence over your individual license. If you want to keep an individual license so you don't have to abide by their policies, then you need a different account and you need to pay for it separately. Incidentally, that was terrible for workshops. I was giving people licenses for workshops for using a business one, and then it just like cancelled their individual licenses, which I worked out the hard way that was probably not the right thing to do. Yeah. The other thing with the business one is that it lets the company like set the rules. And if you're using that license, that doesn't mean you can't use it for your own personal stuff. It'll probably it'll just work. But the company can't say you're only allowed to use Copilot for our code base. If you have a Copilot license, you have a Copilot license. So yeah, they need to be comfortable with that, I guess. Cool. All right. Anything else anyone wants to see? The one like thing that I didn't show with the workspace as well is create a Node app for I don't know. Is that you can ask it to create stuff. Now it kind of does a good job, kind of, but yeah, it's not ideal. But if you wanted to like scaffold, oh, okay, well. If you wanted to, yeah, if you wanted to scaffold stuff, that has worked for me in the past, and it says, not what I asked. Anyway, oh, sorry, I thought I was in the command line. Yeah, sorry, it will build a tree, and you can say create a new workspace with that tree. I don't know why it told me it couldn't do it. Anyway. Oh. What's that? Sorry. Well, it should be doing a new, you know why? Because I did the wrong thing. Because I didn't do new. Yeah. Yeah, because I didn't say new, sorry, that was me. But it will say, yeah, here's your directory structure, this is what it would look like.
It's going to give you the contents of the files, right? Not just the directory structure.
If you click onto those files, it'll go away. If you look at that output that we saw before, it'll go away and say, here is the directory structure, this is what they asked for, here is the file, and this is what that file should do, yeah. And so you can say, create a workspace. I've never got this to run the first time. So you still obviously need to know how to code, but one of the, just before like, because we're getting on in time, but just one of the things I want to mention are the next 2 things that the GitHub Next team has been working on. One is called Copilot Workspace. And so the idea is, and I can't show you this, unfortunately, but the idea is you start with an issue, or you just ask for a task in a code base, and you define in natural language what you want. So for this weather API, I might say, can you add another route that returns all of the cities in a particular country? And then also say, make sure there's tests around it as well, and like update the UI for the website to do that too. And you open that in a Copilot workspace, a GitHub Copilot workspace, and it will look at what you've asked for. It'll build a specification to say, this is the current state of the application, this is the future state, this is what you want to get to. You ask it for a plan, and it'll say, well, that means these files need to change in these ways. So defines a plan for making that change. And then for each of those files, you select which files you want it to implement, and you say, implement those changes. And it will give you basically all of the changes that you've asked for, and then you can open that. It's actually backed by a code space anyway, and so you can debug it and run it and do all that kind of stuff as well. Now the idea is not to replace a person by saying, well, we've got an issue, let's click the implement button and then commit that. It's to work like a bit more as a tool that just does more than like work on this file that I'm looking at or work on this issue that I'm looking at. So you can edit anything along any of those points. So if it's given you a spec and you notice that it's missed something in the like future state, you just add that to the future state. Or if it's got something wrong, you change it. You remove that line and you edit any of them and you say regenerate the plan. It'll give you the plan. You can add to the plan. You can add new files. You can do whatever you need. And then the implementation will show you all of the code, which you can also edit and make changes however you want. So it kind of gets you a lot of the way there just by kind of injecting AI at all of those steps to go from an issue into a working change, basically.
If someone goes and looks at the end of the universe, they show that.
Yeah.
Visually see what that looks like.
Yeah. So yeah, if you wanted to see it for people online, if you wanted to see it, the end of the GitHub Universe keynote, they show that video. That video, by the way, was very much Figma, not running code. It looks very close to what it actually looks like now. The reason I can't show you is because I'm not allowed to, not because I can't show you. It's good, like it works really well. So that's one thing that's coming. The other one is a thing called next edit suggestion. So you'll notice like when I'm in the editor, it's working from the cursor, like from where I am right now. But if I was doing something like, let's see if I've got a good example. I don't think I even have any C# in this. Anyway, a login service, for example. So I've got like is password valid, is password complex, and if I wanted to do something like function is password breached, great, return false. Good. We're safe. But I've accepted that suggestion. What next edit suggestion might do is say, well, the next change that I'm likely to want to make after this is probably to go back up to this is password valid and add a call to is password breached. So it will make the suggestion up further or down further in the file. If I then went and switched to another file that is using the login service, and now I need to pass another argument or something, it will say, well, the next change that you probably want to make based on the history of things that you've been doing is to make this change. So if you want to see how that works as well, there's a, if you go to githubnext.com, there's a bunch of these research projects that they're doing. So the next edit suggestion.
It's the tab. It goes to the next change.
They do repetitive edits. So if you
remove
some text and you remove some text, and you go there, it's like you probably want to remove this text as well.
Interesting.
It's not the same as the GitHub one where it actually jumps around your editor for you.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen that one actually. I haven't used Visual Studio proper for a while. Yeah, but like here's an example. Like this is, they're adding some stuff in there, and then it's suggesting the next thing you probably want to change is that line and then that line to add the extra argument. So it takes that tab from where my cursor is to where I'm likely to make that next change, which sounds like a really small adjustment to how Copilot works, but it's massively, like if you use this thing, you spend most of your time looking at the change going, yeah, sure. Yeah, good idea. Great idea. There are challenges around this as well, because sometimes you don't really know what Copilot's trying to do. It might say, go and change this line over here. I think there's an example further down actually where, yeah, I don't know, open questions, there you go, where it will make a change which seems to not be the right thing, and then it'll change something else later on, and then it'll go back and undo that change that it was doing before, because now it's on a different path. And it's a bit, yeah, so it's not perfect. And also, do you want a change that's just a line? Do you want a change that's one character? Do you want to delete all of this and replace it with all of this? Like those are questions that are hard to answer. But that one's coming too. So yeah, those are the two main ones that are kind of coming. But if you wanted to have a look at any of the stuff that they're doing, Yeah. There's some that have made it into product. There's research prototypes. There's even ones that are still like a napkin sketch, which is like tells you the stage of the development. Workspace is there. So you can see what workspace looks like here as well. The GPT-4 with calc, I've never seen that, but apparently it's completed. So, and there's some I think that are, or maybe completed means we tried it and it didn't really work, so we've abandoned it, which is totally fine. Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff like that. If you want to see what they're doing. Cool. Yeah.
Another small thing that you didn't show, which I generally use quite a lot as a starting point, is the commit suggestions. You make a bunch of changes similar to the PR suggestions, but inside VS Code.
Oh yeah, I think I did show that, didn't I? This one?
Oh, did you show that?
Yeah.
I must have been trying to see editor.
You must have been doing editor config work. Yeah, yeah. There's also like the command line one, which you probably saw. Like you can get Copilot to make suggestions in the command line. The auto-fix stuff for, there's another one as well where if you do secret scanning in a GitHub Advanced Security, you can supply a regular expression that that shows you a secret. There's a little tool in there where you can describe what what the regular expression is that you want, and it will write the regex for you, which is probably the best use of AI I've ever seen. Yeah.
Explain the regex.
Explain. Yeah. So I mean, this might be funny, but I think it's utils.py. Here's a bunch of like regular expressions, and you can ask it to explain that, and it will tell you. Explain. Like that highlighted sregex thing. Python string, validating the strength of passwords. So it breaks it down for you. But interestingly, those regular expressions I wrote by asking Copilot to write a regular expression to do a thing. So it's great for demos because you ask it to write some code for you and then you can show off how it explains what that code does. I don't need to know anything. It's perfect. Yeah, so cool. All right, that was like a big demo parade. Do I have any more slides? Probably not. Probably nothing useful. There you go, ship it. If you want to ask me about stuff later on, I'm Damo Visa everywhere, including Damo Visa at github.com. We had a bunch of questions from people. I don't remember who asked the best ones, so we can give those licenses.
I reckon you either give them out or just ask who wants them.
Oh yeah. Do people who ask questions want these?
Who
No.
wants a free JetBrains IDE for a year?
Yep.
And doesn't already have one and wants to give something a go, like Writer or Data Grip or
So the
RubyMine?
extension for the JetBrains stuff for Copilot Chat just got GA'd, like general availability in the last couple of weeks, I think, maybe inside the last month. So you can use Copilot for that too. I think they have their own one as well, which is fascinating.
So it's like, I started using GitHub Copilot afterwards, and it just like,
Huh.
I'm
I'm going to take that back to the team. Take that back to the team. Yeah. All right. Well,
Let's pick on some people. The gentleman with the headphones,
I got one last time.
you got one last time?
would you like another one?
I can't activate two.
Yeah, you can.
Well, they're for
I think
different.
I think you can. You just pick a different IDE.
But it's up to you. You don't have to.
They're free and they've got to go to somebody because you've got a all products pack, I presume. Yeah.
Yeah, for the old pack.
I got the all products pack.
Who doesn't have the JetBrains all products pack?
Yeah, but I don't want one.
You don't? All right. There we go.
Who hasn't used Writer?
Yeah. I mean me, honestly.
Well, you should do it.
Yeah, I should, but that's another thing that I would need to. Yeah. I've ReSharper I used to use, but now I don't use a real IDE anyway. So.
All right. Who else? Yes. Good stuff.
Yeah. All right. There we go. Job done. JetBrains should still love me, even though I don't use any of their stuff.
I've been told to get on camera, so I'm on camera. Is there anything else you want to cover off before we finish? I know it's been probably the longest session in the history of the Brisbane.net user group, so thanks for your patience.
It's all right. No, not really. I mean, yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of talks and stuff that you could do on making the most out of Copilot. Giving it as much context as possible is kind of the ideal. That's going to give you the best results. Keep other files open that contain good code. Write consistent code, and then it'll copy you. But otherwise, yeah, you kind of get used to how to use it. I think they've said it takes maybe about 10 days of use before you're like, oh, great, I know how to make this thing work for me really well. So, but yeah, any more questions, please just ping me.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.